Welcome to another episode of Euphoric, the podcast. I'm sitting across from my guest today, Peter McLaughlin, who you and I share a lot of interests in how the subconscious mind works. So I cannot wait to get into this conversation. And I think it's so interesting, Peter, when we start with story first, like how you arrived here. I was reading recently a little bit more about your journey and your story and how you were diagnosed with leukemia and given only 10 years to live after that. And you decided not to crumble, but to understand instead, what is the root of this? So I hope we can just start there. Like, what
Sure,
did you
yeah.
find along that journey?
You said, what did I find along the journey?
Yeah, like
Um,
finding that root cause and getting interested in the subconscious mind.
yeah, I guess I found what exists below the surface of the ocean. There's a whole universe under the surface of the ocean. We still don't understand everything that's there. And I believe it's exactly the same for us as humans. And this has been discussed since ancient times. But if you don't have a reason to go there, often you don't. I certainly didn't. And I I got to the point where I realized that I was going to have to plumb those depths because when I was given this diagnosis, which actually was a twin diagnosis, it was Lyme disease and leukemia on the same day, and they said, you know, if you're lucky, you'll live 10 years. This was 23 years ago, and we don't know what causes it. We don't know how to cure it. I realized, okay, this is going to be on me,
Mm.
and I think I walked into the metaphorical cave, and it just there were more passages and went down deeper and found more things. I feel like I still am. I think you could spend your whole life, in some respects, exploring the deeper aspects of your psyche and finding things that had eluded you for so long. And then the payoff is that the things on the surface that were really bothering you begin to either evaporate or get so much better.
So like what happened in real layman's terms? Like you start digging really deep into the depths of your psyche. It's 23 years later, so you're here with us,
Mhm.
cured, I'm guessing. So like what actually happened?
There were so many things that happened, Carolina. I mean, one of the things that pops into my mind immediately is, and it took about 3 years between the diagnosis and when I got trained as a hypnotherapist. And part of the training out in Santa Fe, New Mexico, was we would choose one of the instructors to be our hypnotherapist. And we would get into these like really long sessions. They could be hour and a half, 2 hours, and I'd be sitting in this chair and I'd be sobbing because of something in my psyche that we went back to. And one of the things that I noticed when I came back from the training, my kids were really little at the time, is that the anger that I had was gone. Like they were doing the exact same things that little kids did that previously would cause my jaw to lock up and think it's a great idea to put my fist through a wall. Glad never did that. And just all, my muscles getting tight. And they would do the same things and I wouldn't have, my body wasn't being hijacked. And it was just one of the many things that happened as a result of that training and then the subsequent work that had these remarkable results that I couldn't have predicted because it wasn't like I was working on releasing anger with my hypnotherapist. We were just going for the deeper roots of leukemia, let's say. And this is the kind of thing that would come up and then get resolved and then something else. And so it's just, remarkable, honestly.
I love how you said earlier how, if there's no reason to excavate, like most people just won't. And I think
Yeah.
life does throw us enough reasons to
Yeah.
to want to know why. Like, why am I falling into these same patterns? Why is this happening to me? Why this? Why does this affect me? All that kind of stuff. And I'm so curious for just, getting on the same page and having all the listeners understand what exactly is hypnosis and what do most people get wrong about it? It's something that I'm also trained in and train others in as well. But I'm so curious because there's a lot of misinformation as well, or just past like preconceived notions about it. So like from your perspective, what is it?
Probably like you, I have always thought of hypnosis as a double-edged sword. That one edge of that sword is fear. People have a fear that maybe they're going to be controlled. Maybe they're going to say things that they don't really want to say, kind of like a truth serum, a fear that they'll get stuck in this state. And then the other side, the other edge of the sword is fascination, that everyone has been saturated with the words hypnosis, hypnotize, and mesmerize since they were little children, because it really is saturated in all of our media, from comic books to movies to lyrics of popular songs and so on. And what people don't really understand, which I'm sure you do, is that it's such a natural state that we go in and out of it all the time. But if your only frame of reference is entertainment, where they're really portraying one person, hypnotist, controlling another person's subject who's enters a catatonic sleep-like state, they do whatever they're told, they don't remember anything, then there's two problems with that. One is that I don't want that experience. And two is if they actually go to a hypnotist and the hypnotist doesn't explain this to them, and they're not in a catatonic sleep-like state where they do whatever they're told and they don't remember anything, they'll say, well, it didn't work for me. So I really do believe, probably like you, that it's really important to explain carefully to people and help them understand from their own lives when they have been in that state. Like the example of driving, and you pull into your driveway 10 minutes, 15, 20 minutes later, and you can't remember driving. It's not early onset of Alzheimer's. It's that you were in such a focused state, a hypnotic state, that the experience of driving and probably time evaporated. It didn't exist because that's not where your consciousness was. That's hypnosis. And when people understand that, they feel way more comfortable, because pretty much everyone who's ever driven a car has had that experience. Or the people, watching TV who even say, I'm going to zone out in front of the television. They say it. They're using essentially hypnotic language. And when someone calls their name, they don't answer them until the third time. And it's not like they've lost the ability to hear. It's just they've got such a tight focus on whatever the content is that they're viewing on that television, that flickering screen, that it's like everything else has faded away for the moment. And as I said, when people understand that, they generally like, oh, okay, I get that. And
And
now
why
we
do you
can,
think that's so important in, excavating our deeper limiting beliefs, our, old insecurities, old identities that don't serve us anymore? What can happen under that level of that conscious awareness?
well, do you mean emotionally? Do you mean intellectually? Do you mean spiritually? Like what?
Probably all of them.
Okay. So the emotions, I think, are the most recognizable and the most powerful. So, for example, a person goes into a past lifetime. This has happened to me. And they witness something like people, and they don't recognize those people, let's say in this example, from their present life, but they burst into tears. Like, that is such an incredible experience when this happens to you, because you know, I don't consciously recognize these people. Why would I have any emotion around them at all? All they did was just come in front of me. And that starts to open up the spiritual realms along with other things too. And it's hard to deny when you personally have that experience that you really didn't live in that lifetime and that you had an emotional connection to these people that you had consciously forgotten. So that's one example where several things crack open at the same time. The spiritual thing cracks open. Maybe you release some pent up negative emotions you've been holding on to literally for more than one lifetime. And because of that, something in your present life gets easier, and other things in your present life start to make sense, because as humans, we generally tend to follow patterns. The same kind of thing happens to the person until they figure out what's causing that pattern. And in this example, it was created in a past lifetime. How are you going to find that if this is not something that you have any exposure to, or if you've just pushed it away because of what society has told you?
Hmm. And so, like in your worldview, this subconscious or unconscious, and depending on which word we choose, it's like everlasting. It's like it's present with us. It follows us. It's something that exists beyond time and space. Do you think that learning more about that has really helped you understand these kind of phenomenon? I mean, I think past life regression is something that's like thrown around, but I don't think most people even understand, like, well, what is that? What does that truly mean for our worldview, for our spirits, for our souls, for a lot of different kinds of things? So what are some of the kind of concepts that maybe have been helpful for you to, make some kind of understanding of these kind of phenomenon?
That you're an eternal spirit. You have always existed and you always will. Like a driver of a car You are not the car. You're not the two-door coupe, and you're not the minivan. You're the driver inside of that body of that vehicle. And it's the same now. You've got a physical body, and you've got an ego, and you've got a biography from this lifetime, but you're so much more than that. And this is why when people die, they don't lose consciousness. Just type in near death experience on YouTube and listen from hundreds and thousands of people who have been in a medical setting, and it was a fact that they had no heartbeat and they had no brain waves. And a certain percentage of them come back and explain and describe a period of consciousness when they were clinically dead. Why can they do this? How is this possible? It's because the body's just a vehicle. And we, in our own vehicle, perceive that the other person has ceased to exist because we have become so reliant on our 5 physical senses. And you need a body to access what we call reality. But in a non-physical sense, it doesn't mean that you're not still alive. You are. You're just not in that body anymore. And it's such a tragedy for people, all of us, when we lose people or a beloved animal, when it feels like they've ceased to exist. That's the hardest part. And I'm not saying that it's easy to not have the physical presence. No, that's hard for us as humans. But the way I believe you heal grief is that you meet with the deceased loved one. I did this with my dog when my dog died 2.5 years ago. But when he was at the vet, and they were like, just let us know when you want us to administer the injection. I was with him physically, looking in his eyes, holding his head in my hands, but I also was alternately closing my eyes and going into consciousness with him. And when I did that, we were in a meadow, and he was running around in the meadow playing with other dogs, and then he'd run back to me like all excited, and then he'd go back in the meadow, and I would open my eyes and look in his eyes, and then I'd go back into consciousness, and I would say to him, hey, this is a natural transition. It's time for you to go to the next step in your evolution. And because of this, it was painful. It was really painful. And I cried and everything, but it wasn't as devastating as I know it would have been otherwise. And I still meet with him in my daily meditation. I still have him come, and he's there with my other spirit guides. And sometimes I play with him, and the guides even start laughing and everything. And other times he's just kind of hanging out there, and I just acknowledge his presence. But I feel like this is so important for us as humans, because it's like falling off the edge of a cliff, this concept of death. And we're all scared of it. And I just don't think it has to be as terrifying as we have made it by locking ourselves into this 5-sense reality.
Well, I love what you're saying because, I have had so many incredible experiences, with Huxley's spirit. That was my dog's name, after his passing. And it's like, when my grandmother passed, so it was like, let's say 5 years ago now, she gave me 3 signs and I was completely blown away. I was like, wow, like grandma's still there. My dog has given me like 130. Like he is just like all the time present and just showing me his love and stuff. And I had a really beautiful session actually yesterday with an animal communicator. And, the things that she said, like no one would possibly have ever known. And it's just like, he's there, and he's talking, he's communicating. And I think it is interesting because, we have the field of personal development and growth, and it's all about, defeating your limiting beliefs and becoming a better person. And then there's this like spiritual world and, our spirits and our souls. And then there's this like idea of, the Jungian unconscious and dream interpretation. And it's so interesting how much more these worlds are interrelated, I think, than we ever knew, and how much beauty there is, and really being able to tap into that, that unconscious mind, whether it is through dream work, whether it is through, hypnosis, whether it is through, working with practitioners and stuff like that. And I'm just so curious because we started this episode, talking about why you got into this work. Is this any kind of stuff that you believed in or looked into before you were diagnosed with leukemia? Like, who was the version of you back then?
Yeah. Um, Not really. I didn't really look into this. I think I always considered myself to be to my grandfather sort of taught me this, that if the herd is going to the right, consider going to the left. And I remember being in high school, and I was not a drinker in high school. I didn't do drugs. This was the 70s and drugs were everywhere. And I remember just walking by myself down hallways. And the only way it felt okay was the example of my grandfather of telling me that it's okay to go your own way. So I always had that part, but not the heavy investigation into past life and so on. Although I must say that when I was 18 in the movie Somewhere in Time, which is my favorite movie, check it out, those of you out there, if you haven't seen it, Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. It's about, it's a really cool story about time travel. And the time travel is not like in a capsule or something, it's in your mind. And that was already obviously appealing to me back then. So no, I was weird. I was an actor for a while. I worked on Wall Street. When I was diagnosed, I was volunteering to be a firefighter and an EMT in my town in Connecticut. So I had a weird kind of eclectic background. I owned a security guard company, but it wasn't like I was on that path. And frankly, that's why I think that it happened in the first place. I think my soul was like, you're effing this up. You're on the wrong path. And we've tried to get your attention on several occasions, and you keep ignoring us. So we're going to hit you so hard, you can't ignore it. And that was true. I couldn't ignore it.
Yeah. I've heard, I mean, I'm going to mess this up, but there's like a quote out there. It's like, make your dreams so big to compel you to change. Otherwise, like the challenges will get bigger.
Mm.
It's like something in life will, try to get our attention. And if first it's the whispers and then it's the brick wall, and I love being able to see the meaning behind that because oftentimes when something bad does initially happen to us, we get so stuck in the why and the bemoaning and, the victim mentality. But it takes some hindsight. It takes probably some years of healing and understanding, but it's so beautiful when we can look back and understand like this is why these things happen to forge me into who I am. And I'm really curious, you talked about a little bit about, taking the rebellious route and not partaking in drugs and alcohol. And I think for me, I thought I was being such a rebel, to start drinking and stuff like that. And it's just such a ubiquitous pastime. There's very heavy drinking, but I feel like a lot of people just have this routine. They go to work, they get home, they pour the alcohol, and it's just ad infinitum, this numbing life. I'm just so curious in your experience, what do you find is this like root cause, that deeper subconscious, thing that compels us to, either drinking or numbing out like that?
It's a need. Well, human beings, as you know, are wired to avoid pain and seek pleasure in that order. And alcohol is a drug, and it really helps people in a short term, and then it has lots of negative side effects to distract themselves from their underlying pain. And pain comes in all shapes, forms, and sizes. It can be physical pain, it can be emotional pain, it can be psychological pain, it can be spiritual pain. Boredom is a form of pain. And then, as you said, it's so ubiquitous. Alcohol is available in plenty. It's sort of expected for celebration. So there's a neurolinguistic programming anchor between states of euphoria and excitement and celebration and victory with alcohol. And the same linkage exists for if things go terribly. I gotta have a
For
drink,
everything.
right? Yeah, for everything. It's like cigarettes. People will tell you that they use it to focus, and they'll tell you that they use it to relax. It's the opposite side of the spectrum, right? Um, and it's so normalized in our culture. And I remember getting to this point where my wife and I would go to a restaurant or something, and I'd feel guilty if I didn't order a drink because that's the first thing they say. What can I get you to drink? It isn't usually like, what can I get you for an appetizer? It's what can I get you to drink? That's the first thing. So it's really baked into the culture in a big way. And then the spiritual dimension of this, it lies in the language, in the words. What are the words that we use for alcohol? Alcohol, booze, liquor, and spirits. And if you can be under the influence of alcohol, then by definition, you can be under the influence of spirits. That's not a mistake that is called spirits. Because when you get drunk, your soul temporarily leaves your body. And it's like leaving your front door to your house open and going on vacation. It doesn't mean when you come home, all your possessions will be gone or some weird person will be sitting on your couch, but they could be. And so spiritual entity attachment is a thing. That is a thing. Just like you can have parasites and not know it, physical parasites. You can have energetic parasites and not know it. And alcohol is probably the most common root that creates this.
I love that. There's so much more depth to, not only recognizing how socialized we are. And I really appreciate that because, so many people just think of it as a personal thing or, this person doesn't have the willpower or something like that. And it's like, buddy, let's look at the culture we were all raised in, right? Like if we want different outcomes, maybe we don't make everything anchored to alcohol, right? Celebration, belonging, acceptance, everything. At the end of the day, relaxation. But it's like that deeper sense of like, how are we abandoning ourselves? I think that's the perfect, word for what you're describing of leaving the door open as you go on vacation. It's like it's a form of self-abandonment. And we don't understand that consciously, but subconsciously something like that is happening. And, we're not present to whatever it does need to be changed or whatever it is that does need to be felt and stuff like that. So with this kind of understanding, how would you work with someone to, now that we understand what's going on, how do we get freedom?
For me, it's always the root cause. It's like saying to a mechanic, hey, there's smoke coming out of the engine of my car. How do we get to the point where it's not smoking anymore? And the mechanic's going to say to you, we've got to find the hose that's got a crack in it and is spraying some liquid onto something hot. It's not, the solution isn't going to be let's install a fan to blow the smoke away so you can see driving down the road. It's always going to be root cause. And I believe the same thing when it comes to working with people in their most pressing issues. It's going to be root cause. So there's going to be a moment in time at which that became the solution. And it may be because this is their beloved uncle kind of led them down this road, probably for good reasons, or it seemed that way. Or maybe they wanted to feel sophisticated, like you were saying earlier. I felt like I was, with the in crowd, or I was sophisticated, or I was adult now. Or maybe this is what they felt they needed in order to be able to be calm and relaxed in social settings and not kind of in their head all the time. But for me, it would primarily be to get to the root cause and then resolve that, reverse it, and then do the hypnotic programming at the deeper level that is based upon that individual's goals, what they consider to be their highest aspirations, and how being free of alcohol would presumably help them get to those higher aspirations. The other thing that I might do too, and I've done for many people, is in hypnosis, do a future progression. So we have a regression to the past and we have a progression to the future. And I often take them to a fork in the road. And at that fork in the road, it's like, okay, the decision of what I'm going to do moving forward. Am I going to keep drinking? Or am I going to be free of alcohol? And I would first take them, say, 10 years down the road in their mind where they're free of alcohol, and then just explain to me what's going on. How do they feel about themselves? How do other people feel about themselves? How does their body actually physically feel? What does it look like when they look in the mirror? And then have them come back to the fork and say, okay, now you go down the road where you keep drinking for 10 years. What does your body look like? What does it feel like? How do other people interact with you? How do you feel about yourself, especially when you look in the mirror? And that contrast is so stark that it really helps people, I think, on a deep, deep level, make the choice that produces the outcome that they really want, which is probably we all want this, right? We all want radiant health. We all want to feel close to other people. We all want other people to, be happy with us and to sort of, be proud of us or something. And that contrast over a 10-year period in the minds of people is really remarkable.
Yeah. I think that level of work is so important, and especially going back to the root cause, a lot of times we think it's like, oh, the first time alcohol is maybe introduced, so it's like, oh, I'm going back to my teenage years or my preteen years. And I've done work with so many clients, it's like, no, alcohol is introduced when we're like 5, like we're not drinking it probably, but it's like the
Mm-hmm.
association, the meanings in the mind of like, this is how you adult, this is how you're accepted, this is how you belong, this is what this means. Those
Mm-hmm.
are formed so early, and then it just keeps getting reinforced, and then you do try it, and then that teaches you a lesson, and then you get this reward or this sense of benefit, and those just keep stacking, and those are
Yeah.
so strong that they almost can't compete with all the negative effects until you do this deeper work of changing those meanings and associations. I think it's so important. Like anyone who's going into, changing their relationship with alcohol, to not just say, oh, I'm just not going to drink for 30 days or 60 days. It's like it's mental homework. There's so much deeper things to do than just this little habit change and trying to change the ritual or the activity itself. And I love that future progression as well. And especially recognizing that, most people don't want to stop doing something that they like. And it's like if you can tie it to like the benefits and the big vision, the big dream, the big goals that you see for your life, and you understand how interconnected they are, that's what it's truly all about. And I think that's what really got me so fast. I've been alcohol free for 8 years, over 8 years now. And I made that connection really quickly of like, oh, this is what helps me be an author. This is what helps me leave my day job. This is what helps me start and launch a business and, become
Mm-hmm.
successful. And it was just like, why would I ever go back? I mean, it was, why would I go back to this mediocre life? I think that's so important. Tell me a little bit about this tool you use called havening. What is that, and how does that work with your clients?
It's very similar to EMDR. If you've heard of EMDR, and
Mhm.
if there are people out there that haven't, it refers to some like rapid eye movement. And I've done EMDR as the client, where you're basically following this ball across a screen. And and while you're doing that, your mind is on some kind of a trauma. And no one knows exactly why this happens, but your mind seems to have the ability in the right circumstances to resolve trauma. And I think hypnosis is one of those states, especially if you do certain things in that state, EMDR, havening, certain psychedelics, and again, in a kind of controlled environment, it's possible. So havening is, people are basically tapping, and there are different ways of tapping while they're blinking their eyes. And I think the
Mhm.
magic isn't really in the tapping and blinking. That just helps the mind get into the correct state. But the magic is more in identifying the target, the trauma, and then asking people questions with their eyes closed about that on all the sensory levels. So what are they seeing inside of their mind? And generally speaking, it's like a scene. And are there colors? If so, what's the dominant color? Are there any sounds? And then how does your body feel? And generally, people will feel tension. Sometimes they start crying. Sometimes they see themselves as third person that's watching the scene. And then you say, who's the third person? How old are you? Because sometimes they might say, I'm 6 years old watching the scene. Sometimes they're first person. And then you go through these iterations that might be 30 seconds at a time, iteration. And and that's the processing. And then after each iteration, you're asking the client, okay, what's happening now? Because the scene keeps changing. And this is where the genius of that part of our mind resides, because it may be, oh, I'm not first person anymore. Now I'm third person. I'm moving farther away from it. The scene is becoming more and more dim. I can't see it anymore. That sound that I heard is gone, or now there's a new sound. Before it was like somebody yelling, and now it's birds chirping. And and over this processing, what they're really doing is they're essentially telling their subconscious mind that that incident is no longer a clear and present danger. It is now something that's benign. Because one of the things that I came to in the not too distant past, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, was that everything in our life, every word, every stimulus, every memory is ultimately filtered down into our nervous system. And our nervous system, as you know, only has two modes. It's got safe, not safe. That's it. Right? Sympathetic is fight or flight. It's not safe. And parasympathetic, rest and digest, is safe. So with a trauma in the past, because the subconscious has no concept of time, it means, if you're still triggered by it, that the subconscious still treats it as a clear and present danger when you're triggered. And our job is to shift that into no longer something I have to worry about to protect you. It's benign. And so if I get triggered in the future, nothing happens. Like that example of me coming back from Santa Fe, and now I wasn't getting angry when my kids were doing the same thing they were doing. That was the trigger, but something had changed inside of me to turn it from dangerous to not dangerous.
Yeah. It's so fascinating. It's like a code that's been developed in your mind or a program, right? And we're
Yes,
shifting the language of that. We're shifting, it's like it makes sometimes no sense to someone who's kind of looking at this process from the outside. Like, why are we talking about colors and sounds, right? But it really is. That's like that's the language of how the mind encoded these experiences and into that default state, like you're mentioning, of safe and not safe. And if we can change that encoding, like it really changes so much. And you have to just go into it. You have to be, willing to see and to have like an open mind and experience these kinds of things. Because my mind has been definitely blown with these practices and them on my clients as well. So thank you for sharing a little bit about that. I
definitely.
have two more questions for you.
Sure.
One is, what is like the coolest or weirdest or strangest or most like synchronicitous past life regression that you've ever witnessed or experienced or conducted? Like, do you have any stories around that?
I have a million stories. The one that always comes to me is one of the ones that I experienced personally because I can tell you firsthand what it felt like. And I was sort of alluding to it before, where um, my wife and I were actually doing marital counseling. We were having trouble a number of years ago, and there was something about the session that kind of cracked something open. I could feel it, and we hung up the Zoom call with the therapist, and I looked at her and I said, "Something is coming up for me right now. I can't tell you what it is." And she's like, "Okay, just deal with it." We were in my office. I sat down in my chair. I reclined. I put myself in a hypnotic trance, and I immediately went into a past life. And it was summer, and it was like on the side of a sloping hill, and there was the sound of battle everywhere, and I was in the middle of it. I was fighting, and it was really hot. And then I got hit with a spear, and I rolled down or rolled, slid, whatever, down this hill, and I was lying there on my back, and I knew I was dying, and I was feeling like a total failure. And in the next scene, this is where a woman and three, maybe four children, they all looked like they were wearing gowns, were standing in front of me. And I didn't recognize any of them from my present life. And in the chair with my wife watching, I just burst out into tears. And I was sobbing for probably 2 minutes. And I don't just cry at the drop of a hat. And it was so painful. And I found myself compelled to say to them when I got more control of myself, "I'm sorry." And they said, "What were you supposed to do? You died." And I remember having this moment of like, wow, they're right. Like, I did. Like, what else could I have done? And what was wrapped up in all of this, and I apologized to them, and they forgave me and said, "We don't hold you responsible." And I don't even know what it was, but I probably was not able to protect them. And there was this whole thing wrapped up in there about feeling responsible for other people. And I had learned that when you feel responsible for other people, you have to be right, because the consequences of you being wrong isn't just for you, it's for everybody, which makes you a super annoying person if you have to be right. And I just felt this tremendous relief after that around that concept of being responsible for others. Like, it became so much easier for me if people were in a political discussion to just listen to them. Or if I was in one in the past, it was like this really intense thing, and then now it just feels like it's not that big. It's honestly not that big a deal. Like, I can let it go. Or people can criticize me on my YouTube channel, which happens all the time. Like, the rain in the background's too loud, the rain in the background is too soft, the rain in the background is too hard. It's like there's too many drops, there's too few drops. Like, it's anything you imagine, anything can be. They can say it's the best thing I ever heard, or it's the worst. And it just, all of that became easier to just like, oh, the thank you. That's a really nice thing to say. Or, okay, you don't like it. That's fine. Whatever. But I found just this tremendous relief as the result of that past life session. And there have been hundreds of people that I've worked with that have had similar kinds of experiences in all different, you know, time periods, all different walks of life. And usually it's the most quote unquote mundane ones that are the most moving because they're just human beings. We're still human beings. It doesn't matter what our technology is. We still have the same feelings. And if anybody's interested in this, you can go onto my YouTube channel, which is Blue Sky Hypnosis, and go to, one of my most popular past life regression track has just under 1 million views. And that means that there's hundreds, if not thousands, of people that are writing in about their experiences, which is only a fraction of the people that have had experiences. And just read them, read what they say, because they write these long tomes about, oh, it was 1621 and I was in this tiny little town in Germany called blah, blah, blah. I've never been to Germany, and I looked it up later and it exists. And I was a baker and my wife had an affair with somebody, and we had a small child and the child drowned in the river. Like, it was amazing. And there's just hundreds or thousands of these stories, and you can read them for yourself.
It's so fascinating. I can't wait to do that. We're going to put that link in the show notes so people can go check that out. I have just one more question for you. Based on a lot of the breadth of everything we've talked about, whether it's spiritual health or emotional health or, hypnosis, the subconscious, or just anything really profound, what is one of, a meaningful book in your experience that you've read in your life that you would love to recommend for us?
I think it's Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. Tolle, Eckhart Tolle. I reread it after my dad died, and I was with him. I was holding his hand when he died at home, and there's so much wisdom in the simplest concepts. And this is a very simple concept that's hard to enact, and that is, and Joe Dispenza talks about this too, that your past has been rehearsed so many times that it makes your future predictable. And that the only thing you have any agency over is the present moment. And that's where you can make all of the changes. And that's what Eckhart Tolle talks about. The power of now, the power of being fully present. And when you start to recognize it, you're like, oh my God, I'm like in a fog. I'm thinking about what's next, and I'm thinking about what happened before. And you really, in my experience, have to remind yourself, no, come back to the present. Get back in your body. This is where you can have control over your life by healing the things that have happened to you, by rehearsing what you want your life to be like. And it's hard at first because your ego does not want to be in the present moment. And yet everybody listening can agree that the greatest moments in your life have been when you were fully present. Like when you were first in love, you're fully present. And you have no concept of time. It's a hypnotic state. Or you're an athlete and you're in the zone and everything's going perfectly. You're a fully present man, and that's why it's going so well. Or you're an artist, same thing. Or it's just one of those days you're hiking and you're seeing God's beauty or something and you're just overcome by it. You're fully present.
We're doing this incredible challenge right now in my club community, and it's all about awe. And I have to say that since my dog passed, my ability to recognize awe is probably always there, but my ability to recognize it has just increased tenfold. Especially like life and death can really do that for you when you're, contemplating mortality and spirit and all that kind of stuff. And it's remarkable. Like I think for me, someone who's been into personal development and reading a lot of these books for years, this idea of like, presence can be really elusive. It's like, okay, I'm present, now what? You know what I mean? And you just then quickly move on to the next thing. But I think for me, this concept of awe, of like really noticing like the splendor. And yes, you could be in a beautiful hike and see the splendor of God, but it could also just be just like a really tender, beautiful moment in front of you, has really deepened my appreciation of the present moment of like, we're witnessing miracles all the time. all the time. And most of us just carry on with our to-do lists and the stresses of the day, you know what I mean? And I think that that's a beautiful way to like really make your life not just meaningful, but something that you look back on it and feel the depth of. You feel like you really lived it. It's because these are these moments that like expand time, I think. Time, like you said, there's no time when you're falling in love. And, we're all getting older and we're all marching closer to the end of our lives in one way or another. And it's like that's truly what we have. That's truly what we have to take advantage of now. So thank you so much for that recommendation.
Sure, absolutely, pleasure. And if I can say one more thing, I recognized a number of years ago that other people don't give you love. They can trigger the feelings of love inside of you by what they say, how they touch you, how they look at you, what they give you, but they don't actually install the feelings of love. They don't release the vasopressin and the oxytocin and the dopamine and whatever else is going on in our bodies. We're doing that. And that's another program, I think. When she looks at me that way and says that thing, then I get to go release the chemicals. And understanding that concept means that it's possible to step into that state anytime you want and feel those feelings that every human being wants, which is love. And because it's the same thing with usually with, I want this kind of car, I want this kind of house, I want to take this vacation. What do we really want? We want a feeling. You don't want just the paper bills in your wallet or the digits in your bank account. It's how you imagine you'll feel when you get to that place. But why not go to the feeling first?
It's so important. It's something I've been doing with my clients for years as well. It's like goals, I think, grow us, spiritually, emotionally, but it's those feelings that we're after with any of our goals. Like we have the opportunity to feel those today. And it's like you said, like imagine winning $1 million. How would you feel? Right? Happy, ecstatic, safe, taken care of. Like, okay, well, what can you do today to feel happy? What can you do today to feel ecstatic? Like we literally are in control of our states. We have that power. And I think it's a really good reminder because, everyone's human, everyone falls back into
Mm-hmm.
hoping just external situations change. Like we have to remember constantly almost that
Yep.
we are so powerful that we can actually determine our state.
Yes. Yes. And you're right. It's a practice. I think that's why they call qigong and meditation and prayer practices, because we must continue to practice them because our the animal part of us wants to keep reverting to just the physical. And the ego, in order to feel relevant, Eckhart Tolle talks about this, wants to project us into an uncertain future or a fearful future, or wants to take us to the past with regret. That's where it feels relevant. It doesn't feel relevant in the present moment.
Yeah. It's like a sense of control too. Like if I worry about every,
Yeah,
catastrophe that happens to me, I can try to control it.
right. Yeah, good luck with that one.
Oh my
I've
gosh.
tried.
Oh, this has been such a fun conversation. Thank you so much for bringing your wisdom to the community. Where can people find you? Where are you most active? What's like fun and going on in your world right now?
BlueSkyHypnosis.com is my website, and Blue Sky Hypnosis is my YouTube channel with 240 pieces of content, something like that. And then I'm developing a new way of practicing that's going to be housed under petermclaughlin.com, where I'm going to I'm aiming for fewer clients, but to give them more support to go deeper with them. I've learned over the years it's the people that really commit to this. You've probably found the same thing, that go the farthest. And I really love the idea of just having fewer clients that I go deeper with. And so that's being undertaken right now. And then I'm going to do more of the digital assets for people that want to take advantage of that. So mini courses and more YouTube content and maybe some group classes.
Awesome. Well, we'll be in show to include all those in the show notes below. Thank you
Thank you.
again
You're
for being on
welcome.
the show today. I hope you have a great rest of your day.